Okay, let's get started today with replacing the coils on a Dodge Dakota. So this is the firing order, and this is valid on both the V8s for the Dodge Dakota, and technically if you have a V6, it's the same firing order as well. Of course, it doesn't have cylinder 7 and 8. So if you're looking for how to replace a specific coil, check the description below, and I have a link to each coil's replacement. So let's get started. So the first step, and this is a 10 millimeter, is you're going to need to take a couple bolts off just to remove basically the air box. So pretty easy to do, not much to this. Excuse the fact that my ratchet is broken and it will not stay on the extension because the little ball bearing is worn out on it, but you get the point. And I'm not going to fast forward through this video. It's a longer video, and that's why I'm putting the link down below so you can get to wherever you need. I've had some people in the past complain about me fast forwarding, saying I'm fast forwarding through the part they needed, so I'm not going to this time. You can watch the whole video if you're looking for help, although basically if you just want to watch the first coil replacement, that'll give you most of what you need to know. The only really difficult coil to replace is actually the one in the back left on the passenger side. So take the air box off. And then right now, make sure you disconnect the IET sensor right here. And then I'm just gonna, to get started, I'm just gonna lay it over here on the passenger side of the vehicle. And that'll give me all the room I need to get to all four of the coils on the driver's side over here. So use a knife or a small screwdriver and just release these two clips that are holding the heater hoses in. You just need them so you can move the heater hoses a little bit to get to some of the coils underneath. And one of the reasons that one of the common reasons that you'd be replacing your coils, it's obviously not always, but if you're getting a P0301 code on your OBD2, which just means a misfire, frequently that could be the spark plug, sometimes it's the coil. And my opinion is if you're going to replace one coil, just go ahead and replace all of them. So you just remove the nut from the top of the coil, disconnect the sensor, and then just pull straight up on it like that. So here's a new one. I always like to kind of do a visual check before I get started. Make sure they look like they're the same, it's going to fit. And if your coil, most of them come with some dielectric grease already in the end. If not, pick up some and put on there. It just helps keep it from really getting stuck to the spark plug. So just push it back down on the spark plug, make sure you feel it snap onto the top of the spark plug, onto the electrode, and then just tighten this nut back down. And then once you get that tight, make sure you plug the electrical connector in. And it's not a bad idea, in my opinion, is to start the vehicle between every coil replacement, just to make sure that you don't have a bad coil or you didn't mess something up along the way. So start it, make sure it's not misfiring, and then do another one. That's just my opinion. So on to the second one. And to get to the second one, we're going to remove this little bracket right here. And this is one of the brackets that was holding up the air box. So just same 10 millimeter, and just remove this guy and get it out of the way. And that's going to give you the room you need to get to this next one. And again, the coils on the driver's side are pretty easy to get to. Nothing difficult at all about it. It's the one, a couple on the passenger side are a little bit harder, especially the last one. Cylinder 8 is not a lot of fun to deal with, but it's not that hard either, especially if there's two of you. No problems at all if there's two of you. If there's not, I'm going to show you some tips on how to do it by yourself. So this is number 2. And I'm just going to quit talking for the sake of talking. You can just watch what I'm doing, and I'll just comment when I think there's something you need to hear. If you find the clip is hard to get off, depending on how old your vehicle is, the clip electrical connector may be hard to get off with your finger. And if so, just use a little small screwdriver to help with the clip. Right, now let's move over to the other side. So finish taking off, you want to finish taking off this hose on the back side. Mine's a little stuck, so I'm just using a screwdriver to kind of loosen up the hose. Yours may just twist right off, but mine did not. And then depending on how tight yours was around the throttle body, you may need to release that gasket as well. You see mine slid right off, which is not a good thing. Really, if it slides off the throttle body that easy, that means it probably wasn't tight enough to start with, which probably means that there was some air getting in around the sides that you didn't want. And again, on this side, they're just about as easy on this side as the driver's side, with the exception being cylinder 8. And cylinder 8's not hard. It's a little more difficult if you're by yourself and don't have someone to help out, even a kid, but not impossible, and I'll show you my little tip. Okay, now let's get to having some fun. So this one's not too bad to take off. This would be your cylinder 6. Of course, all of this is a lot easier when you have small hands like I do. So if you don't have small hands, go find someone who does. That's my tip. Okay. So now let's tackle the fun cylinder, cylinder 8. So basically the first change you want to make is you'll want to go with a short extension. The 6-inch extension is a little too much for back there. So if you have a 2 or 3-inch extension for your ratchet, that's perfect. You shouldn't have any trouble getting the nut off. That's not the difficult part at all. Now, so here's my tip if you're doing this by yourself. This hose right here will get in your way if you're trying to do it by yourself and you only have 2 hands and it'll be hard to move this out of the way. So I'm just going to use a clamp, you can see. Use anything. You can tie it up with a piece of string or wire or whatever. You just want to hold it out of the way. That will come in handy because you're going to need one hand to remove the coil, to pull up on the coil and finagle it out, while your other hand is adjusting the oil dipstick tube. That's really the issue. The dipstick tube is just directly overhead, and you have to pull this coil out and at just like the perfect angle. So, use one hand to pull it up, and then use your other hand to kind of push the oil dipstick tube out of the way a little bit. It's pretty flexible. It's not going to break. You're not going to break it off easily, but obviously don't, pry on it too hard. Just enough to, bend it a little bit to get it out of the way for the coil. And like I said, if you had a second person over here who could kind of do one while you're doing the other, there'd be nothing to this. But you can see this isn't that hard either. You just really have to move the dipstick tube until it moves out of the way perfectly for you. And then when you're putting the new coil back in, the biggest issue you'll have is you kind of have to move the dipstick tube a little bit just so you can get the coil to go down straight onto the spark plug. Otherwise it's coming in at an angle and it'll never slide on. So that's about it. That's the hardest one, and that one's not hard at all. So the reason I had to do this was I was having a misfire. I was actually having a misfire on a couple of cylinders, and I'd replaced the spark plugs. It didn't help. So, this truck's got 250,000 miles on it. It was probably time. So I replaced the coils, and it's been running much better since then. Actually, just replacing the coils didn't just get rid of the misfire, but it's actually got a little bit more power. So I'm guessing that they were all getting pretty worn. And again, make sure you put the electrical connector back on, or you will continue to have a misfire. Maybe even on a cylinder you didn't have a misfire on before. Now it's time to put this guy back together, which is basically just the opposite of what we did. So I'm going to start with putting this bracket back. And this is just the bracket that held the air plenum up. It's one of the ones that one of those bolts screwed into. Put the clips back down on the heater hoses. And then it's time to replace the plenum. So what you'll find is easiest is basically get it to the airbox, attach the part to the airbox first, because that requires a little bit of finagling on this guy. You got to slide it in before you can hook the clips on. So start by getting that attached. That requires a little bit of kind of front to back movement because it slides into the little notches. And then once you get that on, make sure you fit it tightly on the throttle body. And if it doesn't fit tightly, tighten up the clamp on the back side of it. You don't want air getting into the throttle body that hasn't gone through your air filter, for a couple reasons. One, it'd be dirty, and secondly, it'd be missing out on your mass airflow sensor or your IET, so the vehicle wouldn't know exactly how much airflow, and the computer couldn't adjust the fuel correctly. So just a good idea to make sure that's tight. And when you're done, also make sure that before you walk away that you plug in the IET sensor on the driver's side that we unplugged to start with. If not, don't worry, you'll get a nice OBD2 code to tell you that your IET sensor is not functioning correctly. You can ask me how I know that later, but you will. So just get these two bolts tightened back up, and then your plenum's back. And then, like I said, hopefully you were testing it along the way, but you're basically good to go. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions below. Let me know if you have